Hello, hello. Well, so, Dennis, I will start with you. You are the author of the Co-Founder's Handbook, so lots of experience here, but what are the key qualities or attributes that make a good co-founder for a startup?
So the most important thing that I've learned as I interviewed hundreds of founders is I realized that alignment in values was a unique factor that ended up being extremely important as the glue. So ensuring that founders ensure that their values are aligned, that they really have the same belief in what they're building this business for is an extremely important factor.
Edith, from an investor perspective, what are you looking for uh, when you're picking a company to invest?
Yeah, so when we first meet the founders, and particularly if there are two co-founders, usually I would ask 7 different things and started with what are your history, why do you come together as a founders unless you met them when you were born, what are the value, I absolutely agree, is something that I think it is actually the most important as the glue. What is your skill set, what's your temperament, what is your network? And all these things combined, there's no like one thing particular, but sometimes you'll be surprised. A lot of co-founders, especially when you meet them separately, they may tell you a different story. So it's really about understanding, and on top of that, I think that particular focus on skill set, a lot of the investment that we do at Raise Capital is very developer driven. So it's not surprising to meet somebody who's two developers, but still, we usually will look for somebody still got to sell, right? If you're an enterprise, it would be ideally to have someone that one is really great at sort of selling and product, the other one is engineering. But if you are in a more B2B or B2C, then it's really all about growth. So it really depends on the exact, because it varies by the nature of the company.
And Maddie, you started Applyboard with your brothers. And what are the challenges of working together with your family? Is it a good idea to bring like friends to your company? What was your decision when you pick your brothers?
I think in our case was a lot of blessing. We are very close family in many sense before we started our plyboard, and we were complementary each other a lot in terms of the skills. And very early days, we kind of decided that we're gonna each focus on a certain area of the business. So that really helped us to not get each other toes. But I agree with the folks. I think like mission of the company, the value that you share are extremely important, and that what keeps the co-founders together. So in our case, was a lot easier because we grew up with the same value. We grew up with having a lot of similarity in our thinking. So that made the process a lot easier.
Great, Dennis. What do you think about people that try to start a company without a partner or alone? What are the advantages and disadvantages of having co-founders in your company?
Well, ironically, the answer to that is the same answer, which is a sharing of responsibility. So if the advantage is you get to share responsibility, and the disadvantage is that you get to share responsibility. And so I think going in, making sure that you really know and define each other's roles, and being able to go in with that, then you're able to effectively navigate all the requirements that are going to come your way as an entrepreneur during that journey. And I think that's a really important piece, is to recognize you get the benefit of sharing, but at the same time, you need to be mature and intentionally work through that sharing of responsibility.
Do the requirements change? Do you have something new in this field, or we are always looking for the same kind of requirement when we are starting a company?
You know what? It'll depend on your business. Your role as a founder will evolve as a startup. Obviously, your company evolves. You never know what's going to be thrown your way. So I think you need to be prepared and not feel I signed up, say, as the CEO, and that means I have to be the CEO for the rest of the time. I think your company and the journey that you're on will begin to define what you do, and don't be so attached to that role. Be willing to be malleable and be willing to figure out where you're best suited. And always focusing, most importantly, on the success of the company. Co-founders are a team, and it's really important to make sure that you remember that and then do what's best for the company.
Let's say you reach this goal of building a team, real team, then you met someone like Edith that will decide if you're investing. So Edith, how you will decide, how companies can show or how founders can show they are prepared or they have this kind of qualities that you are looking for?
By the way, I think that not every such amazing company need to have co-founder. There are many great founders that we have invested, in our case, Good Notes, which is the #1 note-taking app on the iPad last year. Steven is a solo founder. Versus we have Databricks, 7 founders.
Wow.
If you treat co-founders like a marriage, there's a lot of argument there. So in some sense, there's no one size fit all. I think I absolutely agree with what Tanis was saying earlier, which is especially for the first couple of years, is rolling up your sleeve. You do whatever it takes. There's no I'm supposed to be this person who's do sales. I remember my partner for Race Capital, Alfred, when he started BEA, he said that I was the last guy to take out the trash because we can't afford to pay for it. So in that sense, I think it's all about doing whatever it takes, but at the same time, being a founder is to recognize, I don't want to be so Asian where I have to be the best at everything. Forget it. Yeah. In fact, I should focus on things that I'm great at and hire the right people to do what I sucked at. So having that sort of open-mindedness where you recognize your fault and your greatness, that's how you can build a good team.
Maddie, can you share some experience working in your company with your brothers and how you manage this kind of challenge? Like maybe not picking the trash, but how some experience in the hard time with your brothers?
Certainly, like Applyboard grew to over 1,500 employees in the past 8 years. So wow. I do pretty much remember from taking the trash, washing the dishes when we were like 6 years ago. I'm serious. So I fully agree with that. Like you really need to be able to roll your sleeves up and do whatever it takes. It's responsibilities for co-founders is not the JD that you write down. It's pretty much everything and anything that needs to be done. And that was like really our, I would say like work with my brothers that always we were ready to jump to a fire and take it whatever it needs to be done, irrespective of the work. But also I think the biggest and the most important there is like you need someone to lift you up. And I'm big, if I start another company, I would like to have a co-founder personally, because I think as you need someone in your life, most of people do, you need to go to someone when you're on your downside and say, this is a challenge I'm facing, and how can you help me? And that was a very supportive and motivational for us to having 2 other brothers that you can go at any time to.
Now I have one question for all of you, but starting with Tanis, what is the advice you can give to someone trying to build a strong relationship with co-founders? What kind of strategy they can use to build the company in a better way and have a better relation as co-founders?
One of the things I realized was that expectations not communicated become a conflict later on. So I often tell people, if you expected your co-founder to do something, don't be upset if it doesn't happen because you didn't communicate it. And I think one of the key pieces to a strong co-founder partnership is to actually be very intentional about your communication. And so I think when I'm telling and advising folks when they're building their partnership, think daily, weekly, monthly, annually get-togethers where you're sharing what's going on in your role so that the other person is there and is aware of what's happening. And I think that really creates a strong bond. And it also builds trust, which is really the foundation of a co-founder partnership.
Edith.
On this note, I think the #1 conflict is actually equity ownership between co-founders.
Oh, that's interesting.
Unless you, unless you know each other since your childhood, a lot of times it's really about we have heard story where they're a very, very strong leader. They met in previous company before, but the founder only give out like 1% to the co-founder.
I see.
And the co-founder come back and say, can I just have 10%? And the person not willing to do that. That is not really a co-founder in this case. So I think, being co-founders, you really should, upfront and communicate, how we're going to share ownership of this company. And making sure that, if a company's worth 0, it doesn't really matter you own 99%. It's really everybody need to be on the same boat when you're on a Titanic so you don't sink. So in that sense, it's really about being able to share. Particularly if you really call each other co-founder, to at least almost equal, so then you can really be on the same boat to get to your next stage.
But should approach this challenge of equity the same way from the beginning of the company, when the company is really small, and after some time when the company grows and it's a little bit bigger than the beginning, or would it be the same approach?
There are plenty of companies when they get to much later stage where there are co-founder actually drop off. It's really not their thing, and that's why most of the equities ownership is vested over 4 years. In fact, most of the time, even for founder or co-founders, is 1 year cliff. So if you don't even stay for at least a year, you get nothing, which I think actually is fair, because at the end of the day, to get to the stage where like an apply board, it takes years. So I don't think it's fair that if somebody don't want to work on the company anymore and that you take half of the company, that is not fair either. So at the end of the day, it's to set up sort of that vesting schedule and at least 1 year cliff, so that person is committed. And then you can also issue more shares for CEO or even new CEO if you hire somebody new. They all need some skin in the game, which is the ownership of the company.
Maddie, I'm curious about your strategy to manage, family in the same business. What kind of strategy would you advise or use to be successful?
Certainly. So we actually did have an early co-founder that left early days. So we went through that process, and I think it is extremely important on what you mentioned. Equity is a huge thing, and when you have nothing, you're not worried about it. Then it becomes something everyone worry about it, and many people are financially driven. So I do agree with that vesting schedule, and a lot of investors ask you on the very early days to kind of do the vesting. I think co-founders are co-ownership, so I do agree, even if someone came up with the idea, but if you really want to treat someone as your co-founder, be equal, and the equality matters. Like, doesn't matter what role you have, whether you're the CEO or whatever you do, at the end, like, you need to know that this is a shared decisions making. And I see a lot of co-founders, I've been around a lot of startups, that they can't communicate enough. And is at the end, one person has to sacrifice when you're not aligning on who that person would be. And it can't be one person. So I think, like, as long as you treat it as a partnerships and you have the good balance of personal life and work life, a lot of co-founders treat each other as colleagues, and that's not going to work out. You're going to spend 12 hours in a day for the first few years with someone. That person is not just a colleague.
Yeah, it's almost like in marriage, you need a prenup. You need that for your co-founders.
I love that.
That's right.
Tennis, if you're not lucky enough to have in your family the co-founders, what advice would you give to someone struggling to find a co-founder, someone to partner and launch a company? And you have launched some companies with the same co-founder, right?
Yes, that's right. I've built 4 companies with the same co-founder over 25 years. I often advise entrepreneurs 2 things when it comes to I'm looking for a co-founder question. First thing I tell them is just keep building your company. Don't stop and wait for you to find that co-founder. I say go right ahead, keep building your business. Because over time, if you don't find your co-founder and you continue to build your company, you take risk off the table. And what that allows you to do potentially is to maybe negotiate a little more equity because it's less risky. So the first thing I say is don't stop building your idea, continue. And the second thing I tell people is to put yourself out there everywhere. It's the most important thing because you never know where that person is. So letting people know, saying, hey, I'm building this company, I'm looking for somebody who's interested in maybe being an entrepreneur and maybe being my co-founder. These are the parameters I'm looking for. And so if you put yourself out there to your network, to the network of your network, and eventually somebody might pop up. So never give up and don't be ashamed or nervous to put yourself out there. It's the beginning of the start of the uncomfortable life of an entrepreneur. That's a great place to start. Put yourself out there, say, I'm looking for a founder, and let your network do the work for you.
But do you think geography is a factor? Like, should you be like in Silicon Valley or, Kitchener here in Canada or tech centers or something like that?
Yeah, we're in a new world now. Co-founders can be anywhere. I just interviewed a set of founders where two lived in the same area. The other founder lived in Australia,
Wow.
and they had never met over 8 years. And they
Wow.
were successful co-founders. So it can happen. Just your intentionality needs to be much more significant. Your communication needs to be on point, but it's totally doable.
We've been talking about the qualities and what we're looking for in a co-founder. But Edith, what would be the red flags for a co-founder? Someone that you should avoid as a co-founder?
So many. It's not even funny. A few things. So usually when I mentioned earlier, we ask at least these 7 things to figure out the dynamic of the co-founders. But let's say if the history of the co-founder is, I love Collision. At the same time, hey, we just met last week at Collision, and that's why we're founding a company. That's a red flag. And let's say, and by the way, there are many amazing companies like Eventbrite really worked out a couple as a co-founder. If the two co-founders are dating, I just don't want our companies to go down because the relationship doesn't work out.
Okay.
That's another one. And then I do agree nowadays because of COVID, everybody work from home. At the same time, I think it does work a lot better if you're working from home remotely, but you know each other before. There's some sort of history. So let's say if there are 7 co-founders in 7 different countries, I don't know who is not going to sleep because you will have a very hard time to get things started because of the time zone. So there are so many variables. And last but not least, I love this one, which is we always, before we invest, we ask for the cap table. It tells a story. And when you start to see, how come this person have, at least, let's say, 5%, 10% of ownership, but I never met this person. And it's not even a previous COVID. What happened to this guy? And it happened quite a bit because somebody who's very experienced, willing to borrow credibility, you start a company and they disappeared. So it's important to have vesting, but really understand what's the story the cap table is really telling you. That's the 4 things that we reflect, we look at.
I see. Maddie, a lot of myths and misconceptions around co-founders, and one myth is that you should not start a company with your family, or you should not work with your family. And here we are, you have. But what kind of myths or other misconceptions you think there are surrounding co-founders?
Let me be clear. Founding a company with your partner or family is not easy.
Okay.
It's not like a rosy garden that you walk into everything. It has its challenges, and it can be go opposite, as you mentioned. We got lucky at earliest stage. We brought the executive coach, so really supported us. We were all 3 starting the company, was our first company. So I think like that equality existed in our mind. So that really helped. But at the same time, like I've seen a lot of people, I would have not joined the company early days if it wasn't for the mission. If, for example, was something that only 2 of my brothers were passionate about, I wasn't passionate about, I would have not joined for sake of being a co-founder. Yeah. I think that end North Star is really matter because then that really aligns. And then for us was like spending enough time because again, we came from a very close family, so we were spending enough time. So the balance was there. But that does not mean we didn't argue. That wasn't a challenging. It was a very much challenging, as it is challenging with any other co-founder. You get to a disagreement, and it's easier to be disrespectful to your family because they know they forgive you, versus to your co-founder, you might not be if it's not. So it has its challenges, but I think we saw more blessing out of that than the challenges. And as long as the good memories are bigger than the bad memories, I think that's a good thing. So
Agree.
That's true.
But Maddie, thinking about the stress that you're talking about, do you have any advice on how to manage stress as a co-founder or a founder, co-founder? What are the tips you could give to manage stress in the kind of environment that we have nowadays?
for me, I think it's like a lot of self-soothing. If you want to start something and you're looking for someone else to lift you up, it's really hard because entrepreneurship journey could be a 3 years journey or it could be a 30 years journey or maybe more. So I think you need to know yourself very well to make sure you balance that. That's at least for me. I think that really helps. So.
Edith, I know you were starting a fund, and then we got the SVB collapse, and you had the fund money that, and lots of stress. What would be your advice for leading with stress?
This one I learned from Alfred on this one is because you live and breathe. I actually don't agree about work-life balance. There's no such thing. Like if you're really into what you work on, you think about it all the time. So to balance it out is have some hobby where you sort of shift your mind to that you just love it and wanted to think about it so much, so then you don't go crazy. I think you need to be I don't agree with work-life balance, but you do need to be a sane person to be able to treat your employee and co-founder well. So find a hobby that you really, really enjoy to at least you can turn off just for a couple hours a day and then go back to work.
Dennis, for you, how to manage stress?
Yeah, I want to underline how Mehdi mentioned about getting a coach who can be that sounding board throughout your relationship and your co-founder partnership. Someone who can journey with you through that is an excellent way if you need to navigate a unique situation and to have someone there. And I'll also add, I often do tell people no partners with benefits. That's the best underlying thing that you want to do. But navigating stress, I think what's really exciting about the co-founder partnership, it has the opportunity to be one of the greatest human relationships you can have. And the reason for that is because there's authenticity, honesty, vulnerability that needs to occur in that relationship. And in very few other places besides your spouse, your children, your immediate family, do you get that intimacy. So if you can actually relate with one another and be that piece that lifts each other up during your struggles, you can actually build an incredible human experience that you can look back on in your life. So being able to lean on each other and going in with that mindset, I think is a really beautiful way to handle whatever's thrown at you as you go.
Awesome.
Dennis, Edith, Maddie, thank you so much. It was great. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.